Hello, everyone, and welcome to our composing and arranging session with Stephen Feifke. Stephen is an incredible pianist, band leader, composer, arranger, orchestrator, and educator. He has been recognized as one of the leading composers for big band by the Recording Academy, has appeared on over 30 records before turning 30, and is a two-time Thelonious Monk Jazz Piano Competition semi-finalist. He has also written for orchestras around the world, has compositions and orchestrations featured on hit TV shows like The Masked Singer, and was the recipient of the 2020 David Baker Prize for Composition. I could go on, as his accolades are insane, but we'd probably be here all day. So before we get started, if you want to ask Stephen any questions, you can use the Q&A icon in the menu bar on Zoom. And if you're watching on social media, you can also submit questions there to be answered at the end. So with that, let's hear from the man himself. Hi, Stephen, how are you?
Hey, Orla.
How's everything going for you today?
Everything is great. Thank you so much. How's everything going for you?
Good, thanks. Were you lecturing today?
I was lecturing. Yeah.
Thanks for taking time out of your crazy schedule to have a chat with us.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. I thought, if you don't mind, I thought it might be good to start with a little bit on your background. I know you spoke to us before, but for anyone that missed that, I thought it might be nice to set things up a little bit with talking about how you got into music and stuff like that. Is that okay?
Of course.
Perfect. So, have you been playing piano since you were a kid?
Yeah, so I started playing piano when I was 4 years old. My mom was my first teacher. And then pretty shortly thereafter, I started with a couple of other teachers who were not my mom. And Mom, if you're watching, they weren't as good as you.
You have to say that. So, music kind of runs in your family then a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit actually. My mom is a great pianist, although she's not a professional. She's a physical therapist.
Oh, amazing.
So I got tendonitis one time. That was super helpful
Yeah.
to have mom around for that. But yeah, her dad, I'm actually named for her dad, and he was a pianist as well. Not professionally either, mind you, but he had perfect pitch. And
Wow.
um, actually, the piano that I grew up playing used to be his piano. And then on my dad's side, my dad himself is a drummer.
Oh,
And
cool.
not professionally either. He's an optometrist. And
Oh, wow. Also handy.
then also handy, as blind as I am. And yeah, and then his grandfather, so my great grandfather was a violinist.
Oh, wow.
Um,
So going back generations.
yes, but I'm the first professional musician in my family that
And did they
we
have
know.
any reservations about you going professional? Were they worried,
Yeah,
or
of
was it all like,
course. Yeah, of course. Encouraging the whole time, but definitely in the the first generation American kind of way. My parents are both immigrants, so they were just like, make sure that if you're going to do this, you take care of business on your end. You make sure that the music is great, and that yeah. So
yeah,
they're encouraging, but
I think it
careful.
comes from a caring place. They just want you to be able to take care of yourself and
Of course. Yeah, we love mom and dad for that.
And how did you start becoming interested in jazz? Was that something that was in your family as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, not yes and no is the answer to that. I think when my father was my mom's dad anyway was a kid, the songs he was playing were pop songs of the day, which is old Broadway tunes, which makes up one half of the American songbook. Um, and so in that way, sure, it does run in the family. But the way that I started playing jazz really was that I couldn't stand reading music. And so I told my mom I wanted to quit piano. And she said, nah. And so she told my teacher at the time, whose name was Susan Capestro, probably the most influential, impactful teacher that I've ever had in my whole life, that I wasn't enjoying it. And what else could we do? Really wanted me to stick with it. I'm glad that she did encourage that, of course, seeing as how my life has turned out.
Yeah.
But Susan didn't teach me jazz from a real book or something like that. She actually started with composition. And so I learned about composition in terms of improvisation first before learning about what jazz is. And so my very first lesson after I tried to quit was I walked in. I was 8 or 9 years old or something like that. And Susan said to me, she said, can you do something for me? Let's just put the books away for today. I'm like, yes, amazing. Great start to the
Never
lesson,
heard
Susan.
anything
Thank
better.
you so much.
Yeah.
And then she was like, okay, play me a waterfall. And I
Oh,
was like,
wow.
what do you mean? And she was like, oh, well, what do you think I mean? And I was like, do you mean this? Like any little kid would do. I just was fascinated by all those things that the piano, is not supposed to do in early childhood written music. And so, she said, okay, now what happens when the water hits the ground? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, what do you think I mean? And so I was like, well, can I do it? And she's like, yeah, of course. And I was like, crash. And she was like, okay, great. Now softer. And because I smacked her piano kind of hard.
Fair.
But she basically talked me through realizing a setting, like a musical recreation of a physical setting. And that was my first introduction to improvisation. And I realize now, looking back on it almost 20 something years later, that she wasn't instructing me in terms of jazz really, as she was instructing me or helping me realize a different perspective of playing, hearing, writing music. And our lessons just blossomed from there. And so jazz, which is such an improvisational music, it became a natural step along the way of learning how to express myself using music, instead of it being learn this scale, this is a jazz scale kind of thing.
And do you think it made you kind of visual as a composer? If you're using words like waterfall or things like that, do you think that you kind of use like those kind of describing things or visual things when you're writing still?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. It depends on the piece that I'm writing at the time. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Maybe we'll get into it later, but the musical creation process, in my opinion, has 3 different steps. You have like this inspiration land, which is the thing that kind of lives all around us. And as musicians, I tell my students all the time that the blessing/curse, then I whisper, I say, no, but it's really a blessing. The blessing/curse of being a musician is that we hear sounds, and we just have to figure out a way to. And so that we do that is just that we can kind of make the analogy. It's the same way as we talk. The way that we use our voices, we have a system in place. Our body rather has several systems in place, starting through go like down to your feet, like to have good balance, and you use your diaphragm to exercise the muscles that get the air out of your lungs. And then as the air goes out of your lungs and into your whatever tube this is, I'm not a biologist, but that it goes past your vocal cords, and then your vocal cords change the pitch, and the air enters your mouth, and you use your tongue, teeth, the lips to phrase syllables, open and closed syllables. And so that's what I would call like the machinery of that. Because at the piano, my machinery is my things that go into making my arms work, starting at my back, right? And so the processing center is the thing that lives in between that. And so in terms of like how we figure out how to get from inspiration to communication as quickly as possible, depending on what the inspiration is, whether it's a place, person, sound, color, I don't know, music itself can be inspiration. Like how we process that depends on things like ear training, lived experience. And then we funnel the inspiration, wherever it comes from, whether it's a place or a visual element or whatever it is. Sometimes that's what it is, but sometimes it's more raw than that. Sometimes it's more abstract than that, as you know, I'm sure.
So the idea is generally to have the machinery working as good as possible, so when the inspiration comes, you can just kind of run with it.
Perfect. Literally did not say that better myself. That was great.
No, your explanation was better. But I think you're dead right. You need to have all the aspects in place so that you can kind of compose or write as easily as possible. And so that was the first teacher that influenced you. Did you then go on to study music at school, or is this all outside school?
Yeah, no. So I had a couple of other teachers in the Boston area, which is where I grew up. I'm from Lexington, Massachusetts, which is about half an hour outside of Boston, driving anyway, half an hour. And I went to the school that I went to, the high school that I went to, had a really great music education department. There were a lot of big bands there that I tried my hand at writing for when I was still in high school. I went to the New England Conservatory Preparatory School to study jazz there. And then when I moved to New York in 2009 to study jazz and also economics at NYU, at New York University. And while I was there, I started off studying piano with Don Friedman. And then over time, I started realizing that I had an affinity for writing music, or rather, I figured out how to embrace what Susan had taught me all those years ago in a professional context. And the way that I figured that out is by studying with somebody whose name is Gil Goldstein. Gil is a arranger, composer, orchestrator who kind of flies pretty far under the radar, but chances are that you've heard his music played by people like Esperanza Spalding, Joe Lovano, Chris Bodie, Sting, Christian McBride, Michael Brecker. And when I was in my lessons with Gil, I would basically bug Gil and say, "Hey, Gil, what are you working on right now?" And he would tell me, and I would take that and treat it as my homework assignment for the week. And I would come back to my next lesson always with whatever his commission was finished. And
Amazing.
he would come back to the lesson with 7 commissions finished. And then I realized, okay, this is a job that you can have. And I love this. And I felt like I'd kind of found my calling, in a manner of speaking. And studying with Gil in my junior year of college was when I made the shift. And I'd hesitate to really call it a shift, but it's when I added, rather, the arranging, orchestrating, composing thing into my professional circle, in addition to being a pianist.
Okay, and like for us noobs, when you're studying the likes of orchestration, arranging, composition, what kind of things did they have you covering for any students that might like to go down a similar route?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what area of the musical creation process you would be focusing on. That's the honest answer. If you're talking about machinery, right? Like if my machinery for talking is my lungs and mouth, etc., if my machinery for playing the piano are my fingers and arms and etc., then what is the machinery? What is the technical proficiency that you need to have in order to become a professional composer, arranger, orchestrator? There's things like understanding how the instruments work on a fundamental level, even if you don't play all of them. Things like understanding transpositions, various contexts like concepts, excuse me, various concepts like voicings, orchestration throughout history, like in terms of like Duke Ellington, Thad Jones, Bob Brookmeyer, Gil Evans, also Mozart, Rachmaninoff, Ravel, Debussy, and how all of those things intersect, because your voice at the end of the day is a combination of all of the voices that you've heard seen through the lens of your life experience. And so it's not similar from studying another instrument. When you study arranging and orchestration, you're actually studying the mastery of the
Oh,
orchestra from the conductor's perspective. You're studying the mastery of the big band from the conductor's perspective. And when that comes down to it, really what you're studying it from is mastering it from the listener's perspective. And
and
so
so sorry, go on.
the arranger orchestrator is basically just planning out the entire of a performance in advance before it happens. And so having the perspective of the performer is something that is the way that I teach. I think that arranging is mystified in a certain way that can be unpacked super easily, actually. And chances are if you've told your drummer to take 4 out front, but whatever style of music that you're making, you've made an arrangement on. And that's the interesting thing, is like our gold DNA is made up of rhythm, melodies, and harmonies, right? Rhythm implies a passage of time, so we can have one note that comes before another. It implies that this music has a certain beat to it, so we can interpret the 8th note a certain way. Melody is the thing that we sing, right? That's what we relate to. Everybody knows the song, right? No? Well, that's because I have an implied rhythm. A banger. And then harmony colors the melody in good, bad, happy, sad, and everywhere in between. And that's musical arrangement. That's just the order of events of performance. That's the order of events of the song: intro, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, verse 2, etc., etc. Or if you're writing a jazz song, it might sound a little bit different. Whereas orchestration is actually just the process of writing down the notes in a certain way that is conducive for other people, other human beings, to read and convey the message that you want them to convey.
I think I read something about you discussed the five elements of music. Is that something you've always been aware of, and you're like, oh, I got to brush up on my orchestration, that's lacking, or does that happen naturally? They all come together and happen naturally, or do you focus on one if you feel like you need to brush up?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. First, I think it's something that we're all aware of, in one way or another. You know, the thing is that like if I was trying to tell you, Orla, like, hey, I heard this killing song on the radio recently, or more realistically, Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube or wherever people are stealing music from nowadays. um, and I said this song has a really cool beat, but I can't remember the title. You would ask me, how does it go? And
Yeah.
I would wind up singing the melody.
Yeah.
And that's kind
Oh,
of an interesting thing to realize. And so I think it's something that we're always aware of, and just understanding like the different elements as we can perceive them, and not that everybody perceives music the same way. This is something that I've created, to unpack how I personally can understand music in an analytical context, which is not how I compose. It just helps me to get an angle on it after the fact,
okay.
or to teach it rather.
Yeah.
And but I think that we experience music and through our ears and through our hearts, and that's music is not read, it's heard and sung
And
in
felt.
various ways and felt. Yeah. So yes, to your question, yes, and
Yeah.
yes, and also kind of yes.
Thank you. I sound like a bit of a stalker now, but you had a 4-year gap between your undergrad and your master's, I think. Was that intentional? Did you want to get out there and start gigging? Was it a conscious choice, or were you saving up for a master's? Or
Yeah, no, first of all, you're the first person who's asked me about that in many years. And the reason that I took time off like that is because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go into economics or whether I wanted to go into music.
oh wow, okay,
When I graduated NYU, I had some interviews at some investment banking firms and some consulting firms. And I just figured if I didn't try music right then and there, I was never going to try it because of XYZ and,
fair.
1, 2, 3. And so I decided to give it a go for a minute, and I set some goals for myself, and I said to myself, okay, like, let me see if I can achieve those goals, and if I can, maybe I'll keep going. And every step of the way, when I would achieve my goals, I would say, okay, well, what's next? What's my next goal? And eventually, like, I just started working enough and touring enough that I thought to myself, yeah, this is happening for me, and let me go with it. But you know what, I recognize that there are certain holes, certain gaps that I have in my knowledge that I would love to fill. And so I went back to Manhattan School of Music, however many years it was later, 3 or 4 years later, I can't remember. And I studied with Jim McNeely, jazz composition. My master's degree is in jazz composition from Manhattan School of Music. But while I was there, in addition to studying with Jim, actually what I really wanted to go back to school for was to study classical orchestration.
Oh wow.
I just didn't have the resume at the time for getting any sort of scholarship. And so I took the side door entrance into the school through the jazz department. And then I took all classical orchestration classes while I was there.
Oh wow.
And
And
then
I'm
composition with Jim.
I'm guessing New York was a conscious choice in terms of jazz. It's kind of like the Mecca, I'm guessing. Did you
Right.
meet a lot of people that you still play with today? Was that I get the impression that jazz is a lot about collaboration.
Mhm.
And do you feel like how did you develop those connections? Was it through university? Was it just going to gigs?
Yeah. Well, first of all, jazz, sorry, not jazz, but New York in general NYU was probably my last choice of school to go to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was the best decision that I ever made, but it was my last choice. I mean, I'm pretty shy by nature, and so I've learned through the years to combat that and be comfortable being myself in a variety of settings. But when I first moved to New York, I was incredibly shy, and I really wanted to go to a small liberal arts college. Um, I really wanted to go to Tufts and New England Conservatory and stayed in Boston, actually.
Oh, cool.
But I didn't get into that dual degree program. So I also wanted to study economics. where actually I started with pre-med. And so NYU was one of the only schools that I got into that I could accomplish double major vision at. Things changed, obviously. And I got to NYU, and Smalls Jazz Club was a 8-minute walk from my freshman dorm. And so Thursday and Saturday nights, I would be at the jam sessions until 3-4 o'clock in the morning.
Amazing.
And then in my seminars at 8 a.m. the next day, on Friday, some of which I'm ashamed to say I did not make.
The musician lifestyle.
Yeah, now as a professor, I can't tell my students. I can only say to them, do as I say, not as I did.
Yeah. Learn from my mistakes.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're mistakes, but it's a choice.
That's true.
It was a choice. And yeah, but in terms of who do I play with now, I actually play more often with my professors from my NYU days than I do with any of my classmates from those days. Just the way it's worked out for me.
And so do you play with the same people quite regularly, or do you mix it up? I know you have your own big band, it's Kinetic.
Yes.
So do you have those staple players that you play with for a long time, or does it mix up? Does it change?
Yeah. I have a couple of bands. I have a trio. I have a big band. I actually have 2 big bands. One of them is mine, one of them is a collaboration, and in those groups I have staple members. And in fact, my trio, we just released an album in February or something,
The role
or
of the rhythm.
March. Roll of the Rhythm section, and the reason it's called that is because it's actually the rhythm section from my big band.
Oh,
And
cool.
the idea was to talk about, okay, here's us in our little trio element in the nice intimate setting that with 3 people, you can only with 18 people, you can't take all the twists and turns all of a sudden that you can with a trio, because there's just more people in a big band. So you need to give them a set of instructions. That's written music, that's the orchestration. Whereas in a trio, you can kind of just develop something together as a unit. And so that's why that record is called The Roll of the Rhythm section. And then those guys, Dan Chemalinsky and Brian Carter, they also play in my big band with me. And so, yeah, and then the rest of the band, I've had the same band, my own big band for, it was easy when it was smaller numbers, but a little over 10 years, something like 12 years, I think. And then my other big band project is called the Generation Gap Jazz Orchestra. And that's my last album that just came out, and that came in September. And that's a collaboration between myself and Bijan Watson, who's a lead trumpet player with Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra, John Beasley Monkestra. He was with Natalie Cole for many years. He's actually in the movie La La Land. And we put together a jazz orchestra comprised of a very diverse set of ages to try and strengthen this tradition that jazz used to have in bands like Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers of, you mentioned collaboration. That's why that's why we started. As Bijan is in some ways like my musical big brother, and he's somebody who I've been able to kind of call and ask for support and advice over the years. And I'm not sure. I think I'm not the youngest person in the room anymore. But I like to think that I am, but I'm not. And so Bijan and I started this band. Bijan called up some of his mentors, some of his colleagues. I called up some of my mentors and colleagues. And then we both called up some of our students to be a part of this band. And that's the Generation Gap Jazz Orchestra.
That's incredible. So the younger people, they get a little bit of mentorship from the experienced. Is that the reason you kind of set it up? Was it to provide that kind of support for up and coming musicians, or?
Well, that would be nice to say that was the point, but really we just called people who we dig playing with and hanging out with. But to be honest, and then we looked at it, and Bijan was like, yo, let's call it the Generation Gap Jazz Orchestra. And I was like, okay, sounds good. But I will say this, which is that my first gig in New York, I was in New York for a week, and the first Saturday that I had in New York, I played at Rockefeller Center at the Rainbow Room with Lenny Pickett. That was my very first gig in New York City. And that came up from being at NYU. Lenny was on faculty. I think he still is actually on faculty at NYU, and we developed a relationship. And those kinds of opportunities are opportunities that I felt so lucky to be able to have as a kid, and they were very formative for me in my musical growth and in my professional growth as well. And to be able to think that I am possibly now beginning to be in the position where I can give some of those kinds of opportunities to younger musicians is a really deep thing. And I feel very honored and humbled by that. One of the release shows that we had for the Generation Gap Jazz Orchestra album was at the Berklee Performance Center, where I'm a professor at Berklee of harmony and jazz composition. And I was able to hire some of my students for the gig. And that was so special and genuinely humbling because of how they just crushed the gig. They just played so well. And I just remembered, like, when I was that age, like, I was like, why am I not getting called for these things? I can do it. I've learned why, there's more that goes into it than just that. But giving the opportunity, like, allows younger musicians to rise to the occasion. And that's why I said, like, I'd like to think that I'm the youngest person in the room, but I'm just not anymore. And
it's really nice of you to give back in that way, though. Not like a lot of people are horrible, but a lot of people could just focus on their own career. It's nice that you're kind of paying it forward for the people that maybe mentored you or helped you. It's nice that you're kind of trying to give back in that way, I think.
Thank you, Orla. But yeah, if they weren't, I mean, they're killing musicians, that's what it comes down to. Oh, they're really incredible.
Well. So I'm burning your ear off here, and we haven't even started on composing. So I might move to that if that's okay with you.
You're in charge.
Thank you. I'd love to talk a little bit about your process, so the actual, like, the nitty gritty of it. So when you compose for loads of different ensembles, so big band, trios, orchestras, so crazy. When you're starting with your initial idea, do you think about that? Or are you just thinking of melodies? Are you thinking about ideas? Do you think about the overall ensemble straight away?
Yeah. First of all, like, great question. Second of all, like, this is actually exactly what I teach in my Lychee to Large ensemble course, is how to, like, focus in on that first kernel of inspiration and just capturing that inspiration as quickly as possible. And that's part of the reason why I broke up, by the way, like, the 5 elements of music like that, for myself, literally for myself, to recognize what it is that I'm dealing with. Because whether you're writing for an orchestra, a big band, a trio, or a metal rock band or country, I mean, yeah, one of my first gigs in New York after college was I worked at a jingle house called Jingle Punks. You have to write, like, tons of different styles for this. All of them use the same musical DNA. All of them use rhythm, melody, and harmony. And so the only variable that changes is the order of events and who's playing what, which notes are being played by which instruments. In an orchestra, you're going to be using strings and things,
things.
Yeah, it's the first thing that came to mind. Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. Strings
and those things. Other things, they don't matter.
Yeah, and those other things, yeah, whatever. And then big band, is like brass heavy and woodwind heavy and stuff like that. So, but that's also why I say that these things don't live in a box. And if it's helpful, I can share my screen a little bit, because I do have, like, this stuff organized in a certain way that I'm happy to present it.
Yeah, I'd love that. To take a look at your score, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay, not at all. So keep in mind, this is a presentation that I use for when I'm giving guest lectures and also for Lychee to Large ensemble. So don't mind the funny pictures. But basically, like, actually, like, what happened is that I didn't have my glasses on and I literally couldn't see what I was writing. And the photographer just captured it. So the question is, like, with any instrumentation that has X amount of staves, it can be kind of crazy. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, the way that I teach this is like, if you can read and write a lead sheet, which is basically just melody and chord changes and a tempo marking, in other words, like the most stripped down version of musical DNA, then you can write a big band chart or a large ensemble chart or anything else, because all it is, it's about expanding the 5 elements of music. So you've got your rhythm, you've got melody, you've got harmony, arrangement, and orchestration as well. And just to, I go over that and I say, okay, like, what does rhythm do? Okay, melody, what does that do? Harmony colors the melody, arrangement is the order of events and its alterations to the musical DNA. For example, the minor chord on Happy Birthday would be a sad arrangement of Happy Birthday. Not that we'd ever do that, because we want people to enjoy their birthdays. But orchestration, that's the question that it sounded like you were asking to me, is like, who plays what note? Where on their instrument do they play it? And how loud, soft, short, or long do they play that note? And this is where most of the variables happen, because everything else can be contained roughly in a lead sheet format.
Okay.
Right, in a sketch format. And so in terms of there's some definitions in here, but my first step always is to create a word sketch of what I'm hearing. As soon as I have that idea, that inspiration, I want to capture that idea so that I don't forget what the idea is. And I'll just write it down as quickly as possible using pencil and paper or pen and paper, or just a voice memo app on my cell phone, and just say, like, whether it's start with the high strings, they're going to start on an F and descend down a B flat major scale going to G. If I have that idea. D da 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 da.
And do you hear that in your head? Do you like hear it going, oh, I hear this melody here.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah. But there's sometimes where I don't. And then I'll say, like, something rumbly in the lower instruments. And then I'll go to the piano and I'll say, not that I want to start a copyright war with John Williams over his score of Jaws, but that conversation came up in one of my classes earlier today.
I was going to say, my brother's a director, and that's how he talks about music, is purely in like a rumble here or a low dark.
That's the thing about the inspiration land, right? Is that it really does kind of give us a clue into how we feel about the music and the various places that we feel it. And that's why the word sketch is important, is because it's basically a set of instructions for ourselves to write the music down the line, so that we are able to capture that kernel of inspiration and then just expand it from there. And so let me see if I've got like a slide with just the steps on it. I think I do at the end. Yeah, so basically what you do is what I do is I create a word sketch, and then out of that I create sketch notation, and then I get that onto a lead sheet of some kind. And then I expand with a purpose, which means that I get it onto the big band score. And then I format it so that it's readable for myself as the conductor, or if somebody else is conducting. And I engrave it for the other members of the band so that they can read, not chicken scratch. But the lead sheet, that's the interesting part. And the lead sheet can look anything like this. This is one of my sketches that I've used for, this turned into an orchestral piece. This is called The Breath of Life. And then this is an arrangement that I did for a friend of mine, Chad Lefkowitz Brown, Chad LB, on his big band record featuring Arturo Sandoval. And this was A Night in Tunisia. And if it's kind of interesting or helpful, I'm actually happy to just play the arrangement from that record, just so we can hear how it sounds in accordance with the lead sheet, because the interesting thing is that you can kind of follow along with both.
Yeah, it would be great to hear how it came to fruition, basically.
Amazing. Yeah, so let's do that. Let me get this recording going. Just double checking that you can hear this.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna start it. I'm gonna stop it there because, well, first of all, we just got up to right here on the lead sheet, and what I want to do is I want to just kind of switch, and I want to show you guys the big band score really quickly in my Sibelius file.
Amazing.
Um,
Thank you.
because all that I've done here, and I'm going to talk you guys through it before I play it over again. But if I'm going to just toggle back and forth here between A Night in Tunisia big band and A Night in Tunisia lead sheet. But if you were to play this in a small group and you play this introduction open, right? Open repeats, whatever happens is going to happen. Like maybe someone's on the mic talking, for example, anything like that, to somebody just taking a solo, maybe over this section over here, right? Whereas for the arrangement with the big band, I have to be more careful and I have to really spell out exactly what's going to happen when. So it starts off just piano, that's me, and then it includes bass. And then when the drums come in, it's accompanied by other orchestration. And the orchestration is bringing a rhythmic event to life. This is just another aspect of these things not existing in a vacuum. And by the way, the reason that the score is so zoomed out is because this is something that I call the ink test. This is my way of looking at the music as an overview instead of looking at all of the individual notes. It allows me to see, okay, trombones are coming in there with the bari saxophone. And what's happening is that the bari sax is actually doubling the left-hand piano bass line and the bass. So this is actually complete unison. And all the trombones are doing in terms of expanding with a purpose, here's the right-hand piano part. And the trombones are just playing that voicing expanded. Same notes, different color. All the instruments do is that they add more color to the notes. And then every 4 measures, something changes, right? So the first 4 measures was piano, second 4 measures was piano plus bass, third 4 measures, this is getting confusing, third 4 measures, adding in trombone and bari to accompany the drum's entrance. Next 4 measures, the fourth 4 measures, including the saxophones on a counter melody. Fifth 4 measures, the trumpets come in expanding on the trombone voicing. The saxophone line continues developing. And then the fifth, sixth 4 measures, the saxophones cadence their line melodically, and the trumpets, the brass, play one iteration higher of the inversion. But all of this is an inversion. And if I switch back again to the Night in Tunisia lead sheet, all I've done is I've expanded the first 4 measures of this chart into the lead sheet format. And so that's why I start with this lead sheet format, is because it gives me the ability to just capture the initial kernel of inspiration before it goes away. And the thing is that inspiration is fleeting and I don't trust it.
And
or rather, I don't trust myself with it.
And is it trial and error with what kind of parts you think will suit what kind of instruments, or is it fairly obvious to you as someone who's studied that for a while? Or do you have this might work with this, oh no, that doesn't work? Is there a bit of a trial and error?
It depends on how much time there is until the deadline. That's the honest answer.
Yeah. And I know this might be a little boring for you, but I wanted some kind of like of your workflow with Sibelius and for composing, so you can get to that creative point without any kind of interruptions.
Absolutely.
Is there any kind of like workflow tips you could give to any composers, shortcuts, things like that?
Yeah, actually, I created this document for us today, amazing, which is Feifke's 5 keys to Sibelius success. But I started with 5 and I was like, nah, I got to put in more than this. We need more.
That's incredible.
So actually, I'm going to just put a little link in our panelist chat and we can share this maybe with the people. But there's a place to download this from my website, as well as some big band charts as well.
Oh, amazing.
That I made specially for this.
Someone else was asking, were the your 5 elements of music breakdown, was that available on your website?
That is not available actually on the website, but Lead Sheet to Large Ensemble runs a couple times a year, and cool. You can make a time to get on the wait list or speak with me.
We can send a link out for that after.
Yeah, but thank you. I'm so glad that resonated with whomever said that. But yeah, basically the idea that I've had is that, well, first of all, the reason that I love Sibelius so much is that to me, like really like communicating with music is all about getting from inspiration to communication as quickly as possible, whatever language it is that you're speaking. And so to me, like the fewer barriers that I personally have in between my inspiration and the actual process of writing down the notes, the better. And the reason
Yeah.
that I love Sibelius so much is because of how easy it makes it. The program makes it easy for me once I've practiced it a little bit, to basically use it as I would a pencil or even my voice memos app. You get really quick with it over time, and so these are just some shortcuts that I find that I use a lot in my own writing process. So first tip that I would advise people to do is to set up a house style to your preferences in multiple different instrumentations for easy access. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can save your file, like a bunch of different files, like I have on my computer: SF orchestral, SF big band, SF trio, SF septet templates. But you can also export all of those as house style options. Let me see if I can show you my list of, I have some of the built-in Sibelius options still here, but yeah, so if you go to your appearance tab and then you go to the engraving rules, that's where you're going to find all of the things that you can do to make your scores look the way that you want and parts look the way that you want them to. And then if you go to import or export, here's the three that I use. If there's an ensemble that you're writing for more than others, that has their own house style that they like you to use, you can create that as well. And you can select as well, like which ones to import. So keep those handy. That's my first tip. And then I have some just like general workflow writing tips, some shortcuts, some things that I've discovered by accident that I've made a part of my writing process. First of all, you can create a crescendo by selecting the music you want to apply the line to, and then you just hit H to create a crescendo. And the way you select it is by holding Shift and clicking with your mouse or trackpad on the measures that you want to. And you can do it from one line or any two touching lines with that. And now here's something that I included down at the end here, which is that you can actually play back certain instruments by holding down Control. So I can turn off certain instruments for my playback. So say I wanted to hear the people who have the melody here. If I only wanted to hear guitar, trombone, trumpet, tenor, soprano, I can hear those guys by just hitting P. So there's this document which has, I can go through the whole list, or
I won't make you do that.
We can just leave it here, and those who are curious are welcome to download it from that link.
There is a lot of interest in that, so I'm going to make, I think the link has just been sent to the host and the panelists, so if we can get that sent out to everyone who's watching today, that would be great. Yeah, so there seems to be a lot of interest. People are saying thanks for sharing your Sibelius tips.
Amazing, my pleasure.
Someone was asking could they download them, and then someone else said I love your big band with Veronica.
Thank you.
A lot of very excited people today. So there's
I'm so
a lot
happy
of
to hear that.
Good few questions coming in, and I don't want to run out of time and just focus on what I want to talk to you about. So let me just have a quick look. So a lot of people, so you've developed, there was an interest in an online platform called A Step Ahead Jazz. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So my fiance and I, during the quarantine lockdown period, well, first of all, my fiance is a fantastic alto saxophonist named Alexa Tarantino. And we play together a lot. You asked about staple members before. We both play in each other's bands.
Definitely staple member.
Pretty staple, yeah. Pretty glued. And so we were doing these weekly quarantine concerts, and we were using them to raise money for various causes that we felt helped to make the world at that time a better place. And we generated a decent amount of interest online. And we had some people reaching out to us about, well, you guys teach separately. Do you ever teach together? And we were like, no. And then we were like, yeah. And so we created a Step Ahead Jazz, which is, an online education platform that we've run a couple of programs through in the past. We had a program that we ran over one summer. This was like our keynote event, and we did 5 days of classes. We taught over 150 students. We taught over 150 students, like all around the world. We had someone from New York who was tuning in like at our time, and then we had someone like in New Delhi who was like, it was 3 a.m. their time while they were tuning in. It was so cool, and it was just one of those. It was very cool for us as well to be able to reach those people, and we also were able to have a couple of guest speakers work with us. We had Christian McBride, Wynton Marsalis, Sherry Miracle, Jeff Coffin, Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, and I think that's it.
It's
But it was a
amazing.
really amazing week. Yeah.
It's amazing. One of the only good things to come out of COVID was the use of Zoom and online platforms. I think it's opened up. I hadn't heard of what Zoom was before, before COVID. So
Yeah, it's definitely made us notice that the world is a super small place.
yeah, and we can reach each other a lot easier than we once thought.
Yes, hello.
Hello,
By the way.
hello. Someone else wanted to know if you approach writing for TV any differently.
Yeah, great question. So when you write music for TV or any commission-based work, this is also something I teach in Lychee to large ensemble, by the way. It's actually one of the first things that I teach. And it's just the importance of communicating with the person who's hired you to do something. And so in your writing process, when you're creating your word sketch, if you're writing your own piece or your own arrangement, you can kind of just ask yourself these questions. It's actually even harder to ask yourself these questions, by the way, than it is to ask somebody else. But
Oh
the
yeah.
questions you're asking yourself is like, what should the energy flow be? What is the instrumentation? All of those kinds of things. Whereas if you're getting commissioned for something, whether it's for TV or whether it's for someone else's record, then you're asking them,
Yeah.
what
They're
is their
giving you the
vision?
answers.
Yeah, exactly. I actually call being an arranger orchestrator in that context the quote unquote the ultimate side person, because it requires so much musical empathy of just really being able to put aside, literally, rarely, but sometimes 100% of what you perceive your artistic identity to be, to help somebody else realize their artistic vision for something. Now, realistically, you're never going to actually put aside 100% of who you are because someone's calling you and not someone else to do the gig. But if you're writing for yourself, let's say that you're putting in 100% of your artistic licensing and creativity, right? Whereas if you're writing for TV, for Masked Singer or something like that, then you get a really specific set of instructions, like exact timing of the arrangement, exact key changes, moments like that, exactly what the drum should be playing.
And
And
do you ever?
so
Sorry, go ahead. Excuse
no,
me.
it's all good. But just the ending would basically be the ending of to wrap that up is that you can still put in 150% effort into something and also negotiate with yourself about what is the right amount of for whoever asked this question, what is the right amount of your personal artistic license that you want to put your stamp on the arrangement.
Okay. And do you ever have moments where you're like, "Oh, I wouldn't necessarily have done that if it was
No,
a... Oh,
no,
really?
yeah, no, not at all. Actually, I think that it's totally possible to accomplish both things at once. There are things that rather it kind of makes me open my eyes to a new possibility in my own writing. Is like, oh, I would never have looked at it from this perspective before, but that's kind of cool. And so I immediately default to trusting somebody else's musical vision when I'm in that role, whatever situation it is. I feel like the faster I can let myself trust that their vision is cool, hip, and awesome, then the faster that I'll be able to write the music.
Yeah, I think you're a nicer person than me. I think I'd be a control freak about it. Someone else, I should know the answer to this, but I don't. Um, Someone else was asking, is it possible, you might know, to tap in tempo changes during playback, similar to Motu DP in
This is something
I
that
don't think so.
I don't actually that I actually don't know a lot about. I know that there's a calibrate the live tempo playback button, but to be honest, I don't experiment with it.
Yeah.
The way that I use playback is pretty much exclusively to create demos for other artists, not so much that I can hear the music. In fact, in my own writing process, the less that I use the playback for myself, the better, because of a variety of reasons.
Yeah, fair. I'll double check on that and let you guys know, because I'm not 100% sure on that one myself. Someone else asked, I'm not sure if they're asking if the drum charts are available for these arrangements. If you're still there, please clarify. But do any of your arrangements have drum charts available?
Yeah, sure. They all do. Actually. And drum charts can look anything like this.
Oh, cool.
So, actually this drum chart has quite a bit of diversity in it. So I wanted to make sure that somebody could, if they wanted to, just play exactly what I was hearing. And this is exactly what the guy played on the record, Brian Carter. And here's the actual.
Sounds incredible.
So, and then over here, this basically just shows that I want him to pretty much exclusively play these rhythms with the whole kit. And I know Brian, he's going to fill in the blanks. And then this is kicks over time writing. So slash notation means play a groove with the drum set and then catch these hits. And then there's some moments here where, for example, like I didn't know what I wanted him to play. Again, it's like if you're calling the drummer to be the drummer of your ensemble, you're calling that person to shape the music. They're driving the bus, whether you like it or not. So you better be careful about who you call. And so I just wrote melody for reference, play lightly on the cymbals, and this is the flute melody at this point. And by the way, for whatever it's worth, that's Alexa on flute at that moment.
I read somewhere, I think, that you write people's names on scores instead of the instruments sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. It depends on the moment.
But do you ever have to scribble it out last minute and write someone else's name on it? I'm only teasing. Sorry.
Yeah, you're teasing, but I'm cheesing.
So I'm going to let you go in a minute, promise, get back to your day. But we also had someone ask about the process for creating something like your Kinetic album. Do you give yourself a time frame, or is it just when it's done type situation?
Yeah, totally. Kinetic was an interesting album for me. That was the second album that I ever put out. My first one is called Peace and Time, which I put out in 2014, I think. I don't actually even remember. And then I put out Kinetic 5 years or so later. Variety of reasons, I guess. But during that time, I felt like I was really finding my voice. So the first thing that I would say is, like, if you're putting out an album, just recognize, looking back on it, I can say this, but in the moment, I know that it doesn't feel like it. Even right now, as I'm mixing for my next record, I just constantly have to remind myself that a record that you put out is just a snapshot of where you're at that point in time, and nothing more, nothing less. That's it. So the process for Kinetic was first getting the music itself together. Once you've got the music together, you get a budget together, because you got to pay everybody to be a part of your album.
Yeah.
And so then once you've gotten that, then you can book the recording studio. And for Kinetic, it was the first album that I'd done in a while. And so I just did it step by step. I taught myself the process by doing it in a very slow and methodical way. And that album took me about 1.5 years to put together. Whereas the album that I'm working on right now, which is a follow-up to Kinetic, it's my next big band album, which is going to be coming out in June of 2023. It's, now I'm working with a label, and the label's like, hey, we need these mixes on December 2nd. And I'm like, okay, great. And then I go to my mixing engineer, I'm like, hey, I need these mixes by December 2nd. He's like, okay, what? So it kind of depends, but the thing things you need for an album doesn't change, right? You need music, you need album artwork. You don't need this, but it's super helpful to have a sort of release strategy in
Yeah.
mind for how you're going to put the music out there, whether it's on YouTube with videos, whether it's on, using a service like DistroKid, for example,
Yeah.
to get your music on streaming platforms, etc. Are you going to print hard copies of the record? Are you going to use a publicist? Are you going to use radio? Are you going to get vinyl? Blah, blah,
Crazy.
blah, blah, blah. And all those things that go into it, that as musicians, we don't, we'd rather just focus on the actual creation of the music itself. But what you start to realize is that the better you get at putting the music out, the more music you're going to be able to put out in general.
Yeah. And when it's getting mixed, do you work closely with the person who's mixing it? Do you sit back and be like, your job, I'll leave you alone?
Yeah, a combination, honestly. I always like to give it to, I work with two primary mixing engineers and mastering engineers, Brian Montgomery and Dave Darlington. And both of them are so incredible. I just kind of give them the music and I say, do a pass or whatever. And then I listen to it and I say, oh, this is great. And hey, can we try this or that? So it's a collaboration. And, just like I'd hope that someone who hires me for X, Y, or Z is going to trust me to be myself within the context of their vision. The people that I would hire, whether it's the drummer of my ensemble or saxophonist or flautist or mixing engineer, I would want to make sure that I have the ability to trust them as well to add what they want to or don't want to the music.
And you probably work with them so often, you develop a good kind of communication style.
Yeah.
Okay, last 3 questions, and I promise you're free.
Shoot.
So
I'm loving
these
this.
These are really good questions that have come in, so I don't want to miss them. Someone asked if you can quickly show the exploding feature, just
of course.
2-second quick demo.
Yep, no problem. Let's go back to Night in Tunisia, because that one's kind of easier to talk about. So basically the exploding feature. So I mentioned before that I basically expanded, I think was the word that I used originally, expanded the piano part into the right-hand piano part into the trombone part. So as we can see here, just like focusing on the top line of the trombone, this line repeats every 4 measures, as does the piano line. So all of the trombones do that. Just take my word for it. I promise I won't lie to you. All we're going to do here is we're going to grab all of this music. What I did is I pressed shift, or I clicked on this measure, the first measure, and then I held shift down and I clicked on the final measure that I wanted to take it from. And I'm going to command C, just copy it. And then I'm going to go click on all 4 staves that I want to expand it into. You can only explode rather, into 4 staves at a time, not into 5 staves. So if you want to do that, you have to figure out a workaround. Then you go to the note input tab, and then you go into the explode button right there. And voila, it's going to explode everything for you right then and there. And then the only thing that you need to do is the trombonists don't read chord symbols. Well, they do, but I want them to play their notes, not to improvise in this particular moment in time. So I go to the home tab, filters, chord symbols, delete. And then all of them need to have some dynamic marking. Let's call it the same as the drum dynamic marking. Let's call it mezzo forte. So I can select all of those. Then I'm going to click Command E. And then I'm going to hold down Command while I type MF for mezzo forte, which accesses the music text. And there we go.
So quick. It's amazing. Also, someone asked, do you ever use other programs to make your Sibelius score sound even better for demo, or do you just go straight from Sibelius to recording?
Just straight from Sibelius to recording.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
Fair. And last is a bit of a business question, so I'm sorry to finish with a business question.
Not at all. Ask away.
It is a very good question. How do you deal with the copyright for arrangements?
Yeah, so arrangements, you're not able, unless here's some US copyright law for you. But it's I'm sure that they have different words that they use, but here's the actual thing that it means, which is that unless your arrangement changes enough of the musical DNA to create either a parody or an entirely new song, you cannot copyright an arrangement. The exception to that rule is anything that's in the public domain.
Okay.
that's
Very
that.
clear. Very clear answer. Thank you. Well, Stephen, I just wanted to say thanks so much from all of us at Avid for taking the time to do this today. I know your
My
schedule
absolute
is
pleasure.
crazy.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you, Orla.
No, it's been great. And for anyone that missed it, we do have it recorded and we're going to be sending it out with an email. So keep an eye on that. Thanks, everyone. Bye.